is. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Steve Wojtek. I'm president this year for the Committee for Education Funding, or CEF, and also serving as the Federal Policy Advisor for Advanced CTE. Thank you all for taking the time to join us for today's briefing, What's at Stake? The True Costs of Underfunding Education. This is a critical and timely conversation. As a coalition and as an education community, we are collectively navigating yet another complex and high-stakes funding environment. From the budget reconciliation process, looming threats of a rescissions package, to the early stages of the FY26 appropriation cycle. Each of these processes will impact federal investments in education in a myriad of different ways. Most importantly, each of these decisions will have real, tangible consequences for students, educators, families, and communities across the country, the very people that CEF members work to serve every day. And that's what we're here to discuss this afternoon. CEF's mission is to ensure that federal education funding remains a national priority, because that's exactly what it is, a national imperative that is key to making virtually everything else that we want to achieve as a country successful and possible. Today's briefing brings together a range of experts from across the educational continuum to illustrate exactly what's at risk and what's at stake when these investments fall short. We'll hear from leaders representing the full education continuum. Each will help paint a picture of the broad and deep impact federal divestments in education can have on all of our respective communities, and help all of us understand why sustained and robust federal investments in education isn't just good policy, it's essential for our future. So thank you again for being here today. And now I'm pleased to introduce today's panelists. So first up, we have Nicole Fuller, who is the Senior Policy Manager at the National Center for Learning Disabilities, where she works to support and advance NCLD's public policy and advocacy agenda at the national level. She co-chairs two other national coalitions, the IDEA Full Funding Coalition and the National Coalition for Public Education, and serves as the treasurer of CEF this year. So thank you very much. Nicole previously worked as a middle school math teacher for Fairfax County Public Schools. Next, we'll be hearing from David Griffith, who is the Associate Executive Director of Policy and Advocacy at the National Association of Elementary School Principals. He has decades of experience in education advocacy at the federal, state, and local levels, with previous roles at ASCD and the National Association of School Boards of Education. He earned a BA from Villanova University and a master's in education from University of Virginia, and also currently serves on CEF's board of directors. Next up, we'll have Emily Passias from our team, who currently serves as the Deputy Executive Director for Advanced CTE and has built her career around helping states and communities better connect education to the world of work through the development and implementation of high-quality career pathways. Prior to joining Advanced CTE, Emily served as Vice President for policy at the Linked Learning Alliance, where she led efforts to design and advocate for and implement state policies that connect college and career. Next up, we'll have José Miranda, who was born in Nicaragua and moved to Miami at the age of 11. He is now the Director of Government Relations at the Association of Community College Trustees, or ACCT, where he advocates on behalf of the governing boards of community colleges for these institutions and their students. He previously worked for two members of Congress before that served as a high school English teacher in Miami. We are so fortunate too that José co-chairs CEF's Advocacy and Hills Teams committees. Thank you very much, José. And then last but not least, we have Christy Talbot, is the Assistant Director for Government Relations at the American Educational Research Association. She supports AERA's efforts on federal appropriations, legislation, and regulations affecting education research, and coordinates advocacy and association actions on federal education research policy. Prior to joining the organization, she served as a program support assistant for the Office of Planning, Evaluation, and Policy Development at the U.S. Department of Education, and as a senior editor at Columbia Books and Information Services. So with that, I want to hand things off to our first speaker, who will be Nicole. So Nicole, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Steve, and thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon. I'm happy to take just 5 or 6 minutes to talk about funding for the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. IDEA is extremely important because it ensures access to a free, appropriate public education for our nation's students with disabilities. But we're here today to talk about funding because we know that that requires resources. Next slide, please. So who is served by IDEA? Right now in 2025, there are approximately 7.7 million children with disabilities who are served by IDEA. We've seen, as you can see from that line chart, we love a graph or a figure here at CEF. We've seen about a 20% increase in the number of children who are served over the past decade. Children who receive special education services, they're identified as having one of 13 disability types. You can see that pie chart on the left-hand side. Specific learning disability is what my organization focuses on. We have other membership within CEF, such as the Council for Exceptional Children or the Administrators of Special Education, who focus on all 13 categories. So what can IDEA funding be used for? A variety of uses: special education teachers and personnel, of course, paraprofessionals, specialized instructional support personnel are really integral for teaching and learning and making sure that we can provide specialized services for students with disabilities. Evaluations, of course, students with disabilities can stay in school until up to age 21. So transition services, of course, assistive technology. So these are just some of the few allowable uses. Of course, at CEF, we are always talking about how we can increase the total top line for education, and we talk about the impacts of underinvesting in IDEA. So my next slide will show you what we know, which is that special education is relatively costly. When Congress first passed IDEA 50 years ago, they estimated that it would cost roughly double to educate a student with a disability. So that figure on the left, you can see this is from the state of California. It's not super recent. Unfortunately, some of the expenditure and cost studies aren't happening every year, but this shows in the state of California the average expenditures per student for a general education student and for a student with a disability. You can see that special education is, again, roughly double. That back of napkin math, maybe 50 years ago, was not too far off. And the federal contribution is very low. The average federal share in actual dollars in fiscal year 24, and of course held flat in fiscal year 25 with the CR, is roughly $1,800 per child. And then we know 50 years ago, too, Congress had this full funding pledge. They knew that special education would be costly, and they pledged up to 40% of the additional costs of educating students with disabilities. So not the total cost, but again, just that delta, just that excess. So 40% is what they marked as full funding. As most of you know, our federal government has never come really even close to reaching a full funding level. Next slide, please. Um, like I showed on that first slide, because we've had really consistent increases in child count and the number of children who are served, even though we've had flat funding or small increases in IDEA funding, it has simply just not kept pace with the number of students served. So right now in 2025, we are at a historic low in the federal contribution towards the average per pupil expenditures at about 10%. So as a federal government, we haven't even made it to 19-20%, halfway there to that 40% bar, but we are really at a historic low. And that, of course, has impacts on state budgets, local budgets, as you could see in that last slide with the California example. IDEA is simply not something that is optional. We have to provide students with supports and services and a free, appropriate public education. These are not nice to haves, these are must haves. So again, where are we in 2025? I have just one quick visual on my next slide, not a chart preview. But it's just a really helpful reminder that we've made a ton of progress and a ton of growth in the last 50 years. Prior to IDEA becoming law, students with disabilities were segregated. They weren't included in public schools. Only 1 in 5 students with disabilities had access to public education. We've come a long way. IDEA, you can stop sharing. That's the end of my slides. I'll keep talking, but I can make my face a little bigger. Thanks. IDEA isn't simply just a funding law. I know we're here to talk about funding, but we're also here to talk about the role of the Department of Education. And IDEA is about accountability, and students with disabilities are students first and foremost. I know we'll talk later and give examples from other programs, but moving IDEA to another agency like HHS ignores this progress that we've made in moving from a medical model of disability to the social one that we have today. The majority of students with disabilities, they spend the majority of their time in general education classrooms. I'll give a data point here again. 67% of children with disabilities spend we say most as 80% or more of their time in a general education classroom. So while I have some, information to share about IDEA, I think this is a good segue to our next speaker and just reminding everyone that students with disabilities also benefit from other education funding sources because they are in general education settings like ESSA funds. And IDEA isn't only state grants. It's also really imperative to fund technical assistance and support to states and districts to invest in teacher and personnel preparation to make sure that we have parent training and information centers, which are funded under IDEA Part D. These funds all work together and make sure that we have a coherent system of supports for students with disabilities. So with that, I think I can pass it off to my colleague David Griffith from the National Association of Elementary School Principals.
Thanks, Nicole. Yeah, you've come a long way, baby. I think it's a great reminder about IDEA. So let me state right at the outset that NAESP believes in the importance of the U.S. Department of Education as a cabinet level agency. And we also believe the Department of Education should strongly support and promote public education as the cornerstone of American democracy. To paraphrase Jefferson to a certain extent, education and an informed citizen are essential to our country's success and should be a national priority for the federal government. And towards that end, department plays 3 important roles. So one is access. You heard Nicole talk about IDEA and what it did for students with disabilities and opening opportunities to them. 2 is research and evaluation that helps inform the work of school leaders and educators in the classroom. And 3 is the department's role in achievement. And of course, education actually happens in schools and at the district level, and it's all overseen by the states. But obviously, the federal government has a national interest in student academic achievement and supporting state and local efforts to help all students achieve to the best of their abilities. And so really the foundation of the department and all of the programs housed within it is predicated on that. And the cornerstone of federal K-12 funding and programmatic support is Title I, which, like IDEA, is celebrating an anniversary this year. It's a diamond anniversary, so it's a diamond jubilee. It is the largest federal K-12 program and focuses on helping low-income children get the additional supports they need to succeed. So this takes many forms, so immersive reading and math lessons, small group instruction, smaller class sizes, one-on-one tutoring, family engagement, expanded learning time. I could go on, but these are just a few of the strategies Title I supports at the school level. Now, similar to IDEA, back when Title I was first enacted, the Congress did set a full funding threshold as well, which is also a 40% of the average per pupil expenditure that's been made famous, I think, by IDEA. And unfortunately, like IDEA, Congress has never come close to meeting that threshold. So Title I right now is a little over $18 billion for local grants to districts. But that does not provide enough funding to support all Title I eligible students or all Title I schools. And again, like IDEA, Title I funding hasn't kept pace with inflation or the increasing demands of students in schools. And that's why NAESP and a lot of other K-12 groups support the PACT Act, sponsored by Senator Van Hollen and Congresswoman Lee, that sets a glide path for Title I full funding to get to $54 billion by FY 35. So to emphasize the point, we're a little over $18 billion right now, and we need to get to $54 billion to really fully meet the needs of all Title I students. Now, in addition to Title I, there are a lot of other worthy federal K-12 programs that I don't have the time to go into. Title III, English language acquisition grants, 21st century community schools, Title IV, student support and academic enrichment grants. But in the short time I have left, I want to highlight one key program whose federal funding is essential to school leaders and supporting the educators in their schools. And that's Title II, Part A, the Supporting Effective Instruction State Grants. So this is a $2.19 billion program, the largest source of federal funding solely dedicated to supporting educators and improving their professional skills and abilities. As we know, the school leader and the classroom teacher are the two most important in-school factors to student achievement. And as we also know from our school days and working in education, learning for students is a never-ending journey, and it's the same for the educators who teach them. So there's always new content to be learned, improved instructional strategies, and ways to improve for our members as principals in their leadership skills. And Title II is critically important to supporting all these efforts to help educators support their students. Now, one thing I think is really timely, and I think a perfect example of the benefits of Title II funding is the president last week issued a new executive order on artificial intelligence. So 4 years ago, AI wasn't a thing in schools, and I doubt ChatGPT was ever uttered in a single classroom. But now students are using it and experimenting with it just like everybody else. And so educators are not only having to learn about AI on the fly, but they're also having to learn how to teach it to students, what it is, how it works, how students should responsibly use it. And at the same time, educators themselves are trying to figure out how they might be able to use it to use AI for their own work. And of course, since this is so new, none of this was taught in college when teachers were learning how to becoming teachers. And it highlights how important Title II is in providing the ongoing professional support that educators need. So in the president's AI executive order, there are multiple references to the need to provide professional development for educators. It says, and I'll quote here, professional development programs, professional development programs focused on AI education will empower educators to confidently guide students through this complex and evolving field. Goes on, it also, quote, calls for enhancing training for educators by providing professional development for all educators so they can integrate the fundamentals of AI into all subject areas. So as you can see, Title II is tailor-made to support the Trump administration's goals to support AI, and the educator and school leader training needed to make it happen. And of course, this applies to plenty of other content and pedagogical areas besides just AI. So let me wrap up. The role of the department is critically important to making education a national priority, and all federal programs and funding that support school leaders, educators, students, and families is invaluable to our nation's success. So I know we're going to do Q&A at the end, but let me turn it over now to Emily Passias to talk about career technical education.
Thank you, David. It's lovely to be with all of you this afternoon. My name's Emily Passias. As Steve mentioned up top, I serve as the Deputy Executive Director at Advanced CTE. Advanced CTE is the nation's oldest nonprofit that works with and supports directly state leaders of career technical education. I'm very happy to be here to talk about one of my favorite topics, CTE funding and the federal investment in CTE and its impact. It's one of my favorite topics because I am not only a obviously passionate supporter of CTE, but I'm also a former state leader as a state director of career technical education in my home state of Ohio. I'm also the parent of a current CTE learner. So these issues affect our household in many ways every day. Just for a little bit of context, in the summer of 2018, the Strengthening Career and Technical Education for the 21st Century Act, which we commonly refer to as Perkins 5, was signed into law. Perkins 5 is the latest in more than 100 years of federal investment in CTE and has historically afforded states significant flexibility in how they design and support and deploy their CTE systems and their CTE programs in their state. While Perkins really puts states in the driver's seat to determine how they direct resources towards their statewide priorities, how they define CTE quality, how they measure success of their programs, 85% of the dollars that are allocated to states actually are passed along directly to local schools and institutions. This really ensures that that federal investment in career technical education creates the conditions within local communities to build a flush and skilled talent pipeline that those communities need to really thrive. Perkins also serves as a key lever to bring together educators, industry leaders, employers, learners, families, other community members to affirm the community's key priorities and commitments and identify new opportunities to both support learners and support industry and business partners within those communities. Today, we know that 30 million jobs nationwide are held with folks who have an associate's degree, a post-secondary certificate, a journeyman's certification or license, or an industry recognized credential. And as we look into the future, projections suggest that by 2031, 72% of all jobs nationally are going to require education beyond a high school diploma, like those opportunities I just mentioned. Career technical education really prepares those learners. CTE is serving as the bedrock of building our country's skilled workforce by creating opportunities for learners across the country to build in-demand skills, to obtain the training or the credentials that are necessary to break into high-skill, high-wage employment in their communities. Beyond the sort of education and training component of CTE, CTE also serves as a key bridge to make learning relevant. It is an educational strategy that quite literally helps learners put their academic learning to work, where they're learning about English and math and systems and organizations and society in general. CTE helps take that academic learning and put it into work every single day. Continuing to expand the federal investment in CTE has not ever been more important than it is in this moment. It's really important to note, as my colleagues have referenced in reference to their sort of sectors of the education system, Perkins funding similarly has not kept pace with with inflation over time. Nor with increasing interest or emphasis in CTE. I think I probably get the question once or twice a week about whether or not we're seeing increasing interest in career technical education. The answer to that is yes, but the federal investment has not kept track either with inflation or that increasing interest. In fact, if the federal investment in CTE would have kept track with inflation alone, it would be double the size of the funding that is now allocated to Perkins. This underinvestment in CTE has important consequences for this moment. As some of my other colleagues have referenced, technological change, including the advent and increasing use of artificial intelligence, just as one example, requires us to use new and different opportunities for learners to build skills that keep up with the technology and keep up with the needs of the business and industry partners that are relying on us to prepare their future talent pipeline. To ensure that our American businesses are globally competitive, to keep the pace of that change, frankly, to really realize any of our broad scale policy goals, we need a skilled and educated workforce to do that. And I say that in a very bipartisan way. Regardless of political views, Americans broadly agree. 83% of Democrats, 82% of Republicans favor increasing the federal investment in career technical education. What that tells me is that broadly, Americans sort of get it. They recognize that career technical education is a critical piece of the puzzle to ensuring economic prosperity for folks in their communities, for their family members, and for learners all across the country. The other sort of broader point I'd love to make is that career technical education does not exist in a bubble. Congress has intentionally designed connections between Perkins and other education and workforce laws, such as the Every Student Succeeds Act, such as IDEA, such as the Workforce Investment and Opportunities Act. Those connections include everything from having shared definitions and intentional connections across those pieces of legislation, all the way through the opportunity for states to build truly unified plans across all of their education and workforce laws. While CTE has weathered recent budget cycles relatively well as compared to other parts of the education and training ecosystem, the interconnected nature of state and local education and training systems is such that cuts to one part of the system impact other parts of the system. And we firmly believe that cuts anywhere in the education and training system are eventually felt, and we hear this from our state leaders, they are felt in career technical education. And the learners that we're serving. CTE at its core, I think of it as really the answer to the question that any of us who have been educators in our career have certainly gotten from our learners, which is, why do I need to know this thing? Learners ask that of their educators all of the time, and CTE really offers a great solution to that. It's the educational strategy that really connects all that academic learning to the world of work. It introduces learners as young as grade 5 now, and Perkins 5, to the world beyond their classroom walls. It gets delivered in every possible context that we have in our education system, whether that be middle grades, high schools, post-secondary institutions, dedicated career centers. It's happening all over the system. And our educators are working to contextualize and activate all of the academic learning that's happening in other parts of the education system to the benefit of employers and business partners across the country. Funding CTE and ensuring that other education and workforce programs remain well-funded and intentionally connected through legislation, through policy, through coordinated support from the federal government is critical to ensuring that learners themselves are fully equipped to be able to realize their aspirations, and also that our business leaders and our communities and our employers really have the talent pipeline that they need to prosper. Thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit about the importance of investing in CTE. I am going to pass the mic to José Miranda. Thanks.
Thank you, Emily. Hello, everyone. Again, José Miranda with ACCT. And, I'm going to start off by saying that there's going to be a couple of common themes you're going to hear all of our panelists here. And if I can narrow them out, it would be a couple of things. One, there's been the investment at the federal level on education has not kept up with the needs that this country sees and needs in order for us to prosper and continue thriving as a society. And then two, students and their families do not operate in silos. And so any one specific program that gets underfunded or defunded can greatly impact all an aspect of life of the students, whether that's at the K-12 level or the post-secondary level. And so for the post-secondary education, I'm going to be talking from the lens of the community colleges and their students, but you can extrapolate a lot of what I'm saying to our peers in the four-year sector because they are also facing a lot of these very similar challenges as well. So when I think about the federal investment of post-secondary education, I think it serves three primary purposes: student access, student success, and the institutional capacity to serve students. And so when you think about how the federal government invests in these three buckets, it's doing so through several different programs. Our institutions utilize many of them, but if you think about the student access, I think about the affordability piece. What do students need to be able to actually get through the door and start a degree? And that comes from the Pell Grants, which is the bedrock of federal student aid. It comes from the Supplemental Education Opportunity Grant, and it comes from federal work study. This is special for me. I myself, I'm a first-generation college student. I was a Pell recipient. I was also an SEOG recipient. If not for those two programs, I would not be speaking to you today. We've seen a lot of changes that are being proposed right now as as latest as yesterday in Congress, that would greatly impact the ability of students to get Pell Grants, to get SUG, to get for work study. We're still waiting on the president's budget proposal, but we know from proposals during his first term, as well as from proposals from Congress in the last year, that there's not a drive to continue investing. In fact, there's a push to cut funding, cut some of these investments that ease the affordability of students to access post-secondary education. On the student success piece, we're looking at it's not enough. We have lucky moved beyond the idea that it's not enough to just have students enroll, but that we have to ensure that they have the tools and the resources that they need to persist and successfully complete their programs. Many first generation college students struggle when they arrive to college, when they arrive to campus, and without the proper resources, without the proper advice, without the proper tools, they're going to stop out or drop out and end up in a position worse off than they may have been in the first place. And so looking at the federal programs that support student success, we're looking at the Child Care Access Means Parents in School program for parenting students, many of them who attend community colleges. We're looking at programs like Basic Needs, which addresses food insecurity, housing insecurity, transportation issues for students, which are many real issues that a lot of students are facing today. We know that there's a lot of food insecurity in campuses across the country. There's a GAO report that showed that even students who would be eligible for social safety net programs like SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, they're not applying. And we know that there are considerations about making it harder for students or for individuals to access these programs as well. So we have to look at not just the student in the classroom, but the human being that's entering and all the different factors that they need to assist them. Programs like the Post-Secondary Student Success, which is a fairly newer program, also support institutions in having the tools that they need to support students in having the guidance, the mentorship, the advice to continue persisting in their programs and to continue enrolling and successfully come out with a degree or a certificate or something that's going to lead them to family sustaining wages. And then at the third bucket, we're looking at institutional capacity. For many of our institutions, we know that there's been a lack of investment at the state level. The investments have not recovered since 2008. For community colleges in particular, this has been dire. Per pupil, we often get less funding per student than some of our peers. We also are in areas that economically, we're the only economic engines. We have small institutions, we have very rural institutions that don't necessarily have the resources to support the student body that comes through our door. And we're open access institutions. We take anyone and we meet them where they're at. But we don't have the capacity to do that without the federal government investing in programs like Title III and Title V, Title IIIA Supporting Institutions program, which is specifically designed to support under-resourced institutions. And to no one's shock, every time there's a competition, at least half of the recipients end up being community colleges. But beyond that, our institutions, our student bodies reflect the community that they're on. And so we have over 500 community colleges that are HSIs. We have a lot of institutions that are HSIs being Hispanic serving institutions. We have institutions that are predominantly Black institutions. We have tribal colleges as well. And so the institution has to reflect the community that they serve on. These programs, the Title III and Title V programs, support these students and in turn support the entire student body, because once an institution has the resources to support one student, they're not going to leave that to just that student or to that student group. They're supporting the entire student body. The additional advising that becomes available to everyone. The additional supports that are available become available to everyone. Now, let me give you a picture of the impact of some of these things. In the fall of 2023, community colleges enrolled at least 6 million students in credit-bearing programs. There was almost a 4% increase to that to fall 2024. Out of that, we serve at least 1/3 of all the undergraduate students in the country, and we're talking about proposals like the one that we saw yesterday, when they're trying to restrict Pell eligibility to students, a student who enrolls for less than part-time. gets no Pell Grant, that's a huge concern for us. Many of our students are working parents. Many of them have obligations with whether it's caring for minors or caring for elderly parents. Many of them are trying to reskill or upskill, and they can only afford to take one class at a time. But they also still could qualify for the Pell Grant because they're working minimum wage jobs or even less than that. They're underemployed. And to them, losing that Pell Grant would mean not being able to afford post-secondary education, which in turn would mean not having a way out of their current financial situation. And at the end of the day, that's what post-secondary education is there for, is for an opportunity to move beyond your current situation. So I'm going to stop there and turn it over to Christy to talk about some of the research impacts.
Thanks, Jose. And I am really grateful for the opportunity to be here today to talk about the importance of the federal investment for education research and data infrastructure. I am Assistant Director for Government Relations with the American Educational Research Association, and our members receive federal funding for research and training grants, both research grants to conduct education research, as well as analyze and develop findings using federally funded administrative and longitudinal data collections. While the Department of Education supports research across all of its programs, my comments today will specifically focus on the Institute of Education Sciences as a very broad overview of the work IES does and what IES has faced over the past few months. IES is the semi-independent, nonpartisan research, statistics, and evaluation arm of the Department of Education. IES represents less than 1% of the department's budget, with top-line funding of $793 million, but it also has a significant role in documenting educational progress and informing education policy and practice across the nation. A couple of examples include the support of research and literacy that has informed state efforts, particularly as one example, Mississippi, to improve achievement in reading, and another example being multi-tiered systems of support that were developed through IES funding and which meet individual needs of students and are used in classrooms across the nation. A brief note is that the federal government's role in education statistics was prescribed into law in 1867 with the first establishment of a Department of Education for the, quote, purpose of collecting such statistics and facts as shall show the condition and progress of education in the several states and territories, end quote. And this language was essentially the bedrock of the modern day National Center for Education Statistics, or NCES, which serves as the Department of Education's federal statistical agency. More recently, the Education Sciences Reform Act, or ESRA, was enacted in 2002 and authorized the establishment of IES within the department. The mission of IES is to provide national leadership in expanding fundamental knowledge and understanding of education, which includes the dissemination of information on the condition of education, supporting and improving educational achievement and access, and the effectiveness of federal and other education programs. Overall, this work is accomplished through 4 centers, which includes NCES, the National Center for Education Research, the National Center for Education Evaluation and Regional Assistance, or NCEE, and the National Center for Special Education Research, or NCSER. In addition, ESRA includes language on required IES duties, which are currently at risk due to actions that have been taken since February. And in this context, I'll note too that IES has long had a reliance on contracts to carry out its activities. While there have been underlying needs that require robust and sustained investment in IES's activities, during the week of February 10th, we saw the cancellation of contracts that support IES's peer review for research and training grants for FY 2025 competitions that were already underway, conducted by NCER and NCSER, data collections that are conducted by NCES, the development of What Works Clearinghouse practice guides, and evaluations conducted by NCEE. That was then followed by canceled contracts for the regional educational laboratories and the comprehensive centers. Then the department's reduction in force that was followed in March had essentially decimated IES staff, and most notably, this left 3 out of 100 staff that had been at NCES. And I note this because it is important, as NCES is the office responsible under ESRA for conducting the National Assessment of Educational Progress, which is highly cited by policymakers and those who really rely on figuring out how our students are doing nationwide in reading and math. So the combined effects of the contract cancellations and the RIF currently essentially make it extremely difficult, if not impossible, for IAS to carry out its congressionally mandated responsibilities in ESRA. And some examples that I'll note. One is the cancellation of the contract that supports the Office of Science and IAS in facilitating the IAS peer review process, which halted FY 2025 grant consideration. So in ESRA, there are requirements for research to be conducted on successful state and local education reform activities, research initiatives regarding the impact of technology, which I think has been a theme that was both noted by David and Emily around AI, methods of mathematics and science teaching, and there's also a requirement for IES to support within the National Center for Education Research 8 research and development centers. The cancellation of contracts to support NCES data means that data collections are currently essentially halted. ESRA requires that NCES collects data under 15 educational topics to be reported and disaggregated under different categories. And supporting collecting those data, NCES is also tasked with conducting longitudinal and special data collections necessary to report on the condition and progress of education. One example that has been noted was the collection for high school and beyond, which was the next set of data collection was expected to be underway in the fall, but that now has been paused due to the contract cancellation. In addition, ESRA requires IES through its NCEE Center to support 10 regional educational laboratories. And so the current slate of REL contracts had included the development of toolkits that supported translation of recommendations in the What Works Clearinghouse practice guides into evidence-based supports for teaching and learning. And now that work is also at risk given the contract cancellations. So I know that's a lot, but just in summary, I will say that it is important to understand how education dollars are being spent, how students are performing in math and reading and other subjects, and the extent to which teachers are needed and how they can be best supported at this time. IES is the key function of the department that plays that role, and it is necessary to invest in this important work to understand what works for whom and under what conditions, so that all who are engaged in our education ecosystem can thrive. Thank you.
Thank you all. If we can go back to gallery view so we can see each other, I think we'll do some questions. I'm Sarah Abernathy. I'm the Executive Director of CEF, and my colleague is going to put in the chat, if we can, some links to materials that are on CEF's website that buttress some of the things that CEF members have just mentioned. And you may have noticed that we have sort of the continuum of education represented here. And interestingly enough, and not by accident, we have people talking about 3 areas that Secretary of Education Linda McMahon has said that she supports: Title I, special ed, Pell Grants, and then one person talking about an area that has really strong bipartisan support, which is career technical education. And then Christy bringing up the end, which is an area that has received some of the deepest cuts in the last 2 months between staffing and funding cuts. And I thought it was important to talk about all these different areas because, as others have mentioned, the continuum of education is key, and you can't disinvest in one area. I know we started late, and I apologize for the technical glitches that kept us from starting on time. Maybe we can do some lightning round of questions, and if people have questions they want to submit in the Q&A, we can all do our best to respond to them in person and also through that. I put a couple of answers in there, but wanted to start off maybe asking Nicole first. The administration says it supports funding for special education, but wants to move the program to the Department of Health and Human Services and dismantle Department of Ed. How would that potentially impact services and funding for students with disabilities?
Yeah, thank you. I touched on this ever so briefly. I mean, certainly IDEA interplays, and others alluded to this as well, with other laws like ESSA, Perkins, civil rights protections for not only students with disabilities, but other protected classes within the Department of Education. So keeping all of that intact with the Department of Education is really important. In terms of the funding, there's deep institutional knowledge within the Department of Education for administering these grants, and not only administering those grants, but also collecting annual data from states to be able to make sure that that funding is indeed actually fulfilling the requirements of IDEA, and making sure that states and districts are doing their part to make sure that they're serving students with disabilities. So you said lightning round. I'll cut it there and I'll pass it.
I appreciate it. And next on the lightning round question, David, if Congress cuts federal elementary and secondary education funding and makes the surviving programs into a single block grant to states, which is something that the last Trump budget proposed, states could make different decisions about what to fund and what to cut. What do you think are some of the education programs and services that would be first to cut, and how would that reduce services to students?
Yeah. All right. I could try to keep this quick. So, I mean, look, it's not a secret that the first Trump administration unsuccessfully tried to cut Title II funding last time around, and DOGE, or the Trump administration, has cut a number of competitive grant programs that support teacher preparation and development right now. So I think it speaks to a mindset about underappreciating the role and supports that educators and school leaders need. So I mean, that would probably be one, unfortunately, that might be in the chopping block. But I just want to talk just real quick broadly about these block grants, because in a utopian world, I think it probably would play out like that supporters sort of lay out. But the reality, as we've seen over the years, is one, the history of block grant shows that they decline, the funding declines over time, right? You can't show the impact. There's no ability to evaluate or measure that sort of thing. And then the other part is the Congresses and the president simply can't help themselves. Yes, state education, as I mentioned earlier, is a state and local issue. They just cannot help themselves of getting involved in it. And you see that even with the EO about artificial intelligence. This comes out a month after the president says he's going to dismantle the department. Now he's talking about the department and professional development, which we welcome, support educators and getting AI in schools. So it's an illusion that you're going to get this funding without any of the strings attached or any of the bells and whistles. So it's going to be less funding and more involvement, which is a recipe for well, I don't want to say disaster, but it's going to be a recipe for just really tough sledding moving forward. So
thanks. And Emily, I have a question sort of similar to what I asked Nicole, which is career technical education is this odd hybrid of programs that are, in my mind, broadly, there is a Department of Ed state grant program, but there's also a lot of Department of Labor programs that support workforce development and career training. Can you elaborate on the type of guidance you get from federal cabinet agencies and the role they play in supporting career technical education, and what would happen if Department of Ed was eliminated?
Yeah, I would happily share some perspective on that. First of all, to the question about sort of how they support career technical education at the Department of Education, amongst many, many other things, they're working directly with state leaders to obviously interpret and clarify the legislation that can be formal or informal through our beloved Dear Colleague letters, or other types of guidance that we're getting for the department. But what they're really trying to do is create some clarity for state leaders who are designing implementation plans to put dollars to good use, to David's point about having like strong examples of implementation and being able to measure effectiveness. Our colleagues at the Department of Education are helping to enable that for state leaders. They're supporting state leaders in their planning and implementation of high quality CTE programs of study in general. And to what Christy was sharing, they are supporting the crucial collection of data that allows us to understand the impact that CTE has on individual learners, what it has on communities, and the economy in general. They also help inform Congress about what the impact of these investments is. There are certainly provisions in Perkins that require reports back to Congress on effectiveness, and the U.S. Department of Education is enabling all of those things to happen. But I think one of the themes that I've heard across this discussion is that none of us are operating in vacuums. So when funding is cut for learners who are receiving special education services, guess what? Those learners are in CTE programs sometimes. When we have legislators that are coming to us asking for information about the effectiveness of programs, guess what? That relies on data collection and us being able to have data to be able to articulate that impact. So if we are in a situation where the Department of Education is no longer here to help coordinate across all of these different pieces of legislation, that actually, I think, transfers a lot of burden to states to be able to do that coordination themselves, to try to build connections where there might not already be connective tissue within states to support the intentional connection and coordination across early and secondary education, post-secondary, and into the workforce, and make sure that all learners are adequately supported across all of those different levels of education.
Indeed, and it's one of the key. There's many key things to talk about. I could talk about this way too long, but the eliminating the staff and the funding, apparently by canceling it for a lot of the Institute for Education Sciences, the data that Ed collects is often really fundamentally important to the operation of lots of other programs. And presumably states might keep getting data, but if there's no central place to provide it, I don't know that how states can learn from each other, how the federal government can learn about what is effective. It may be hard for it may not be clear how funding should be allocated because sometimes the statistics folks are figuring out the formulas. So I think I'll turn next to Christy and then last to Jose. Christy had a question. You outlined some of the cuts to education research staffing at the Department of Ed and funding for research that have happened in the last couple of months. How will these cuts affect like a typical person, someone who's not a statistician at the Department of Ed, in terms of new educational materials, support for training, analysis of what works? Anything else you care to talk about?
Thanks, Sarah, for that question. I think I can point to a couple of examples that have been affected by the contract cancellations. I'll speak to one specifically out of the National Center for Education Statistics, which is the School Pulse Panel Survey. And this was established during the COVID-19 pandemic to basically provide real-time information on how schools were implementing ways to support students during the pandemic, whether it was through the use of digital-based learning opportunities or the process of which schools were reopening for learning. But with the contract being canceled, there has been a trove of data that is now at risk because one, we won't have better real-time data on, for example, teacher shortages or chronic absenteeism, or the use of supports in schools to support recovery from the pandemic. So that includes things like high dosage tutoring, the use of after-school activities to support this work. So that's one example. And then another example would be the development of tools like the What Works Clearinghouse practice guides. This one example of a canceled contract was related to the development of a practice guide that focused on high schools and looking at how they can improve college readiness. And it was in the final stages. It was planned to be released in the fall. in addition to another practice guide for high schools on how to improve career readiness. But now this information, because of the contract cancellations, is now put on a shelf and won't be available to the public at this point.
Thank you. And final question for Jose before we wrap up. I feel like I've been using this word a lot, but like education funding, investments in education are in jeopardy, and possibly nowhere more than for higher education and student aid, because not only is it a question about money being released to institutions and appropriations for student aid, but also the mandatory spending, the entitlement programs, where if someone applies, they're eligible for student loans, for Pell Grants. And yesterday, as you alluded, the House Education and Workforce Committee marked up its reconciliation bill that had steep cuts to student loan access and to repayment programs and to some to Pell Grants for some students. Appropriations have also proposed to eliminate some programs, the House bill and the past President Trump budgets. If these types of federal support are eliminated or drastically cut, what will be the impact on students who want to attend a community college or a four-year college?
Yeah, so let me give you two very quick, very real examples of what that could look like. And you've already alluded to this. During the fiscal year 2025 process last year, House appropriators proposed eliminating the C-Campus program entirely. What that would mean, if I'm a parenting student, I am no longer able to enroll in school because I no longer have a childcare center on campus or in the vicinity of campus that the institution has given me a voucher for, so that I can take my child there, leave them there safely, knowing that they will be well while I go to class. That will have to be a choice that I have to make. And if I have to make that choice, I'm always going to choose my kids over, potential future growth. And then just from the information that we learned on yesterday in the student aid piece, and it's a formula that you can't look at it just individually. You have to look at the combination of all the different changes that are being proposed. The official text of the bill says that they're savings. I call them disinvestments, because let's start with the student loan piece. Subsidized loans for undergraduate students will no longer be a thing. So if I am a first-year student at a four-year institution, I am going to have a loan that I took my first year for the next 3 years, accumulate interest. By the time I graduate, if I graduate on time, the amount of the loan that I took out has doubled, maybe even more, because of the interest and the capitalization of that interest. In the meantime, I couldn't really pay it back because I was in school. Maybe I was working to take a smaller loan, but that money was going to tuition, or it was going to cost of attendance, not to repay that loan. When you think about the Pell Grant, if life allows you to only take one class at a time because you are the breadwinner in your family, or because you have elderly parents that you have to care for, the federal government now is saying that you don't deserve a Pell Grant just because you can only afford to take one class, or you only have time for one class. And if you look at it on the flip side, if you're able to go full time and you're able to take 12 credits, maybe you only do 12 because you're also working 20 hours a week, or you have other responsibilities. Well, now the federal government is telling you that you will get less of a Pell Grant unless you take 15 credit hours. And again, that ignores the reality of our students today, many of which are not just residential students who get all their money covered, get all their funding covered through that. They have to work, they have other responsibilities. And if you take those proposals into account with the idea from last year, where they were cutting SEOG, the Supplemental Education Opportunity Grant, and Federal Work Study by 50%, then you have a situation where there is less federal money available for students, both Pell, SEOG, and Work Study. Loans are no longer subsidized. And now students are either going to have to, if we're talking about addressing the ballooning national balance of the student loan debt, this is not the way to do it. This is going to lead to even higher loan balances for borrowers who could pay it, but will probably be paying for the rest of their lives because of the interest.
Thank you. I feel like I don't want to end on a bad note. Not that that's a bad note, but I mean, I think all of us have expressed concerns about the uncertainty of funding, and we should be hearing, there should be a lot more information coming out soon. We saw the Education Workforce Reconciliation Bill yesterday. The Senate Help Committee also has instructions. The president should be submitting his fiscal year 26 budget sometime soon. We should also be hearing about how the Department of Ed and other agencies plan to spend the fiscal year 25 money that Congress enacted in March. We should potentially be getting a bill from the request from the administration to rescind some money. Meanwhile, there's a lot of lawsuits going on to try to release money that has been frozen. So there's a lot of uncertainty, and I appreciate that the panelists you've heard from here and other CEF members are doing everything they can to advocate for investment in education, to explain why it's important to provide resources. We have a lot of information on our website. Tomorrow we will have the link to this briefing, and also we'll follow up with some additional background material for those who are interested. But meanwhile, I just want to thank very much all of the panelists for taking the time to talk to people today. Thank the audience for watching, and we will be continuing a series of briefings to talk about why investing in education along the continuum matters so much. If people have questions, feel free to reach out to me at abernathy@cef.org, and I can try to answer or connect you with a CEF member who likely has an answer. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming. This concludes the briefing.